So our speaker this morning, Michael Causey, has been a member of U2C3 for 20 years. During that time, he has served our congregation in many roles, including youth advisor, stewardship campaign chair, and president. He's a retired Air Force registered nurse and enjoys traveling with his wife, me, when not consumed with church business. Please welcome Michael Causey.
Good morning. For anyone that came today expecting a message about the wonders and benefits of cannabis, my apologies. Also, my apologies to the worship team for leading them to believe that I could present this topic in 20 minutes and connect it to our values, when I know full well that that would take a 4-hour documentary and a 3-pound book to explain the documentary. So we'd better get started. The most likely origin story for 420 involves high school students, who else, in California, where else, who coined the term as part of their 1971 search for an abandoned cannabis crop based on a treasure map drawn by the grower of that crop. Now the term 420 friendly has evolved to become cannabis culture slang for marijuana and hashish consumption, especially smoking around the time 4:20 p.m., which we will not be doing today. My apologies to the band. It also refers to cannabis-oriented celebrations that take place annually on April 20th. Thus endeth Wikipedia's research on the topic, and thus begins mine. My generation is well known for experimenting with drugs, especially marijuana. Some of you may be wondering if I did experiments. I began my research on THC, the active ingredient in cannabis, about the middle of last century, whenever I was 15 years old. My research continued through high school, my first attempt at college, to Vietnam and back, then as a hospital corpsman in the U.S. Coast Guard, right through nursing school, and for about a year after graduating and becoming a registered nurse. Of course, understandably, I took a sabbatical when I was commissioned into the Air Force Nurse Corps. I would be happy to share my conclusions and recommendations if anyone is interested. If so, just discreetly nod your head. Thank you, Michael. This may disappoint you, but I don't recommend using drugs, not even cannabis, except for medicinal purposes. On the surface, it seems pretty harmless. It's fun. The most common side effect is not knowing whose turn it is when playing Monopoly. It is an anxiolytic, that's nurse speak for something that helps to dampen down anxiety, and it also helps most people sleep. It is often used for post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. It is used to reduce nausea and vomiting during treatments for cancer, and it minimizes some types of pain. It has a drug profile safer than aspirin, and unlike alcohol, it is not toxic or addictive. Doesn't that sound like a great deal? But it's not all that in a bag of chips. In my professional experience as an RN, if you give any medication out of a pharmacy to 1,000 people, something will go wrong for someone. It is safer than aspirin. Big deal. If you use aspirin routinely and you use it wrong, it can burn a hole right through your stomach. The side effects of alcohol, side effects and adverse reactions of alcohol, are about 2 printed pages. But that doesn't mean it's a recommendation for pot. For teens and young adults, it can create something called amotivational syndrome. It is not as likely as alcohol to cause an automobile accident, but we have some evidence that when it does cause an accident, the accident is more likely to cause injury or death. In its edible form, it is particularly unpredictable, and then it results in thousands of emergency room visits each year. Lastly, long-term use might cause problems with memory. My generation has been lauded and persecuted for experimenting with drugs, especially cannabis. In my teenage years, you could be sentenced for 20 years in prison for simple possession if you wound up in front of the wrong judge in, say, Texas or Louisiana. Years ago, a man who went to prison for exactly that reason came to this church. He left after about 6 months, still trying to put his shattered life together. If you are wondering why the teens and young adults of the baby boomer generation would take such horrendous chances, and why some states attacked anyone who used cannabis so savagely, then you have arrived at the seemingly strange connection between cannabis and the liberal values of the 60s. Some of you must be wondering, why did we do such a strangely inappropriate thing? The short answer is, it was a very serious cultural conflict. Back in the long ago, the use of marijuana, along with flashing the high sign, can you do this, class? I thought you could. Yeah, that's real good. Along with flashing the high sign became part of the liberal identity. Some really fun parts of that identity included displaying the peace symbol, long hair, colorful clothing, music preferences, and of course, painted Volkswagens. In my high school in El Paso, Texas, it was difficult to spot a pothead because our haircuts were identical to those required in the military. Guys had to wear a belt with their pants. Girls could only wear a dress to school, and the length had to be to the bottom of their knee. When it was cold, they suffered. We all looked like the conservatives they taught us to be until 1969, when they took a picture of 500 graduating seniors and one of them flashed a high sign in El Paso, Texas in 1969. It was the first crack in the wall in El Paso. Different for California. If you were keeping company with potheads, you were generally a liberal. If you were liberals, you were counterculture. You were a persecuted minority that believed in racial equality, women's rights, civil rights, voting rights, ending poverty, ending the war in Vietnam, nuclear disarmament, sexual freedom, youth culture, and in general, freedom from unnecessary social restrictions that flew in the face of the American right to the pursuit of happiness. We understood then, as we understand now, that the right to swing your fist ended where another person's nose begins. On the other side of the divide were two types. One type consisted of conservatives who were generally satisfied with post-World War II America. Most were good Christians, and depending on what part of America you were in, they could often see more than one side of things. They usually believed in upholding the U.S. Constitution as they understood it. They usually believed in cooperation between political parties. They believed in elder culture, trust in the federal government, traditional roles, especially for women, racial segregation, inevitable poverty for anyone that wasn't white, limited voting, the law as written being above question, and the correctness of the war in Vietnam to check the spread of communism, and more than enough missiles at the ready to be sure that communist missiles stayed in their silos. They too believed that the right to swing your fist pretty much ended where another person's nose began, with a few exceptions. They are not to be confused with today's populists who call themselves conservatives. Another group that called themselves conservatives did not hesitate to swing their fist at any nose that didn't match theirs. But they were and are currently populist. They despised liberal values, and in their eyes, if you looked anything like a liberal, then you may as well be a card-carrying communist. To attack our values, their favored legislators passed strict laws against possession of the tiniest amounts of marijuana. They put judges in place that would hand down seemingly insane sentences. Often, they actually were the police. The police in these areas, often small towns, often in the South, would stop any painted Volkswagen and look for pot. And if they didn't find any, and if you looked liberal enough, they just might plant some on you, arrest you, and bring you in front of a judge that didn't care for you or your kind. They were a lot like ICE agents, except they did not wear masks or send you directly to prison without seeing a judge. I hope that at some point you wondered what I would like you to do with whatever understanding you might come away with today. Please listen carefully. Rally around cannabis or anything else that unites us. Do what we did. Bring our values forward with courage in the face of injustice and aggression. Talk with people that seem unlike yourself. Get them to talk about their values. Speak up when people vilify acronyms like DEI. Remind them that those letters that are being bad-mouthed have meaning in a democracy. When people are poisoned by hateful, shallow rhetoric, ask how their values can be opposed to the humanity of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What can possibly be wrong with diversity? In the name of heaven, what can be wrong with equity? How can the refusal of inclusion help anyone? When someone cannot or will not come to terms with their own loss of humanity, let them pass. Maybe they will find their way later. By the way, I was the student that flashed the high sign when the 500 of us were photographed. Happy 420.